Here we go. Okay, first of all, yeah, let's do the housekeeping. I've got a bunch of stuff here that I've tried to label fairly well along the way, so that is good. And I've also really tried to make use of instancing, right? Instead of, if the object needs to animate separately, then you want to Control-C, Control-V. But when you Control-C, Control-V, it also duplicates like all the materials and everything, so you can end up with a lot over here. There's some tools for managing that, but that's not as pressing as sort of managing this, right? So we've talked about instancing before, and we also, the instancing is just sort of like the, what is the XREF system, but just within the file, right? So when you bring in an XREF, it's a instance of a separate file. You can also instance anything that's in the file, like this car here, I think is an instance. Where is it? Wait, no. Okay, so if I wanted to make an instance of this car, I have it selected, come up here, and instance. Now it makes an instance of that car at the exact same spot. And so if I move it, you see it's over there. Everybody with me so far? Right, so I've tried to make most of the buildings, there's only 2 main buildings, and instances can have their own, obviously their own position, but they also can have their own scale. So if I wanted another car here that was like twice as big, I could just come in and set the size settings for that one to, that's how I created a lot of the variety in this thing, is by, there's only 2 buildings, and then I created scales like half, quarter, 2, 1.5, you know, in order to create the whole city. Everybody with me there? And the instancing also is lighter on the computer. Okay, so let's clean up this stuff first of all. I've talked about this previously. I'm using just one, like I said, most of you probably want to be getting away with like one infinite light. We talked about this last time. Everybody remember this, right? You know, because these are outdoor-ish scenes, right? So we want one primary light source. The thing you need to make sure you do is make sure there's shadows, and make sure you're using ray-traced hard shadows. Also, make sure that the shadows are not at 100%, right? That allows you to get away with, you don't have to have a fill light. If you turn down the darkness of the shadows, you don't have to make another light to sort of fill in the shadows, right? That's probably better in like a studio situation where you're trying to make it look more realistic. But here, just turning down the shadow intensity does that. And so all this stuff, I've got my cameras that I sequence through, I've got my light and my stage object. We went over the stage object last time, right? That was good? That one posted, right? The one where I was doing Nicole's sheep stuff? Yeah, okay. I'm gonna put all this together into Studio. So that that's all together. Now, the big piece of the puzzle here that's gonna help is that that's one way to organize, just get everything collapsed into nulls, that's good. But these things get pretty big, and so it's good to use the next layer of organization here, which is actually over here, layers, okay? So you can take multiple objects and group them into layers, right? Now, the layer doesn't mean anything for compositing, it's just a group of stuff, okay? So over here, layers, how do I make a new layer? I'm gonna, first of all this stuff I want to be on the layer. I'm gonna make sure I'm selecting it all. Select children. Does anybody know that shortcut off the top of their head? I don't know. Select children.
Select children. Right click.
Right click and select children. So here's all this stuff. I'm gonna again right click, add to new layer. And that puts a new layer here. I'm gonna go ahead and label this studio so that all that stuff is there. I'm gonna turn off caps lock so I can actually type. There we go. Cool. And now you see the layers are color coded. That's what these boxes are. That's telling you the layer. Everybody with me there? Right, so this base stuff, like the large cars down here, which are sacrificing their power to power the city, then that's all under my base layer. And then these over here are turning off, on and off different parts of it. So V is just the visibility. And so that gets rid of it in the viewport, lightens up the viewport. If I also don't want to see the base layer in here, in my object menu, that's this one. Okay? And so that, the way of just paring things down over here so I can just focus on the thing I'm focusing on. The big one is this, so that you can lighten up the viewport and work a little bit quicker, right? And so, yeah, and I've made a few layers here. So I've got that base, and then I've got outer road. That's that one. And then I've got upper road. Let me turn off the stage so that I can move around freely and not look through that camera. There we go. And so there's a things are also slowing down up here. Let's make it a little bit quicker. Options, level of detail. So let's go medium. There we go. So this turns down the amount of work that has to do in the viewport, right? And so this will allow me to hopefully get a little bit more responsive viewport. Again, uncheck that. There we go. And yeah, where's my upper road? Oh yeah, up here. So I built this road on top of some of the buildings. The little tiny Priuses going around there. And so that's upper road. You can turn that one off. And the buildings that support it are also part of that layer. And then I'm going to leave the studio layer on for, well, actually, well, that has the light in it, so I'm going to leave that on for now. But I've got those selected. So let's make another layer here for all of the other buildings so that you can see how that would work. And so I'm going to come back in here and those are already in there. These are the tiny buildings. That's the loop road. All right. What was the other one I just learned? Yes. Control tab, or yeah, it should be Control tab on, well, it would be Command tab on Mac, is tilde from After Effects. Allows you to grab one part of it and look at that full screen.
That's awesome.
Yes,
That's so
I just learned that one yesterday.
okay.
Yeah, so here we go. I'll get some more real estate to do this. So everything that I labeled base is actually one of those communication satellite dishes. And so that one. So there we go. All these bases, and let's group those together. So I've got them all right here now. And I'm going to, again, if I just go to add to layer from here, it'll just add the top layer null, right? And so you need to do that select children so that you're getting all, these are all like multi-part objects, right? So I want to make sure that I have all the stuff. So I selected all of those, then right click, add to new layer. And then this comes in here, this will be dishes. There we go. And if I turn this off now, you should see most of my satellite dishes go away. There's still this, my hero satellite dish. It's over here somewhere. Where's that? Somehow that ended up in this one. And so I'm going to add that to this one. I just want to add it to the existing layer. So I can just go to add to layer versus add to new layer, right? And so add to layer dishes. There we go. And so now I can turn on and off my satellite dishes. Everybody with me? And I could also get them out of my viewport. There we go. So I can sort of process of elimination a lot of this. By turning off everything but the studio, now I'm left, I know that all the stuff that's still left here, except for the studio, are things that have not been added to a layer yet. And so let me delete those. These ones I'm not even using. And what else am I not using here? Whatever that was. Whatever that was. And this is the old roads. I'll keep that, but keep it off. Cool. So now I'm not going to use the floor, but that's the big car. And so let's put those cars together. There it is. So I've got this blue car, blue instance. And let's add those to a new layer. So I'm going to go ahead and add to new layer. This will be big cars. Oh, I didn't select children. Select children. Add to big cars. There we go. Good, that gets rid of my big cars. Turn that off. Cool. And so the stuff that's left here, contact car should go in big cars. That's the contact from, because it's a Prius with a satellite dish on the top. There it is. This should go in add to layer, select children. Okay, I'm using select children all the time. Should make that a button. And add to layer big car. There we go. And big car is off, so that's off. And then everything but the floor. All of this stuff. Actually, this is a road. And then these are all buildings. And so I'm going to make one more for the loop road. Let's go ahead. The loop road is this one here. I made a tiny road in the city that has these little glass things over top of it. And tiny Priuses drive through them. And so this, we're going to select children. And add to new layer. And this is loop road. There we go. Turn that off. And then everything else is buildings. This is an old road thing I'm not using, but I don't want to delete. So we'll select children there and add to new layer. This is buildings. There we go. Cool. Two of them. Oh, those two up there. I didn't grab those. So here and here. This needs to be in buildings. There we go. Cool. So now I've got everything organized, right, into my layers, right? So if I just want to go back and look at the buildings and work on buildings, just turn those on. And the viewport will be way more responsive. And I won't have to like spend 10 minutes just sort of turning the camera around to work on something, right? And edit this thing. And then when I'm done with that, I want to go back and fix that outer road. I can turn that on. It's this one sort of
So much.
this ramp, that, you know, these Prius ramp, Prius coaster, pre-coaster. And then they go into this tube there. And yeah, if I want to see them all in, I can also turn them off in this window, which is also super helpful, right? So that you're not scrolling. You can clearly control what it is you want to see in the window. Okay? So the other ones are lock, and I never even use these. I'm not sure what they are. Like the big ones are see it, and then whether or not you want it to appear in there. And then this one is whether or not you want it to render, I think. Okay, so be careful about that one if something's not rendering. And then solo, just like we were talking about with the music. I just want to see the bass. I can just solo that. It just gives me the Prius bass layer. Right, and if I just want to see the, satellite dishes, and there. Cool?
Yeah. I think I found the shortcut for select children.
What is
It
that?
says, click on it with the middle mouse button.
Click on the thing with the middle mouse button?
Yeah. Like,
Oh,
yeah. Middle mouse button selects the children.
I'd write that one down.
Yeah.
Except if you're using your laptop, then it's unusable. Right, what is middle mouse button on your laptop? Well, I mean like your trackpad.
Oh, I wonder if there is one.
Mash the trackpad with your palm and hope for the best.
Yeah, probably. Maybe it's okay. Maybe it's like a secret code. You're like,
Yeah, it's like a...
twist.
A couple other things I did here. Yeah, so the format. This, again, I'll post this whole file so that it's not that big because there's no textures. There's only 3 colors. So color palette, color palette, color palette, right? Trying to do less with more works better for the design. And then again, the other thing I did here that's speeded it up greatly was this level of detail, right? So there's this, you see this, John and I talked about this on Monday or something. This is just the general level of detail for the display. When you see this online, you also see this abbreviated LOD, right? When people are talking about LODs, that's what they're talking about. Because this is something that they come across, that everybody wants to have a faster computer. So like as soon as you start doing a ton of this stuff, everyone hits a point where the computer slows down. So they need to be able to like dumb down the file so that they can work at some sort of reasonable rate, right? And so that's why this thing is kind of important. And more this is getting built in. Like hopefully in 5 years, this LOD is driven by artificial intelligence that's like intelligently like dumbing down the file as it watches me work or something. I don't know, that's a pipe dream. But yeah, if I turned it to low, yeah, things are getting pretty low poly.
After Effects kind of does that.
Yeah, right. That it just decreases the resolution, right? But you'd want to turn that back up before rendering.
Oh, so rendering, that does affect it in the rendering?
Let's test that theory.
I wonder if it was only viewport.
I think it's just viewport. Let's just confirm that. Let's just do 1 frame. I'll put this on low and render that frame. Yeah, that's full detail.
Yeah, so it's only viewport. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I can't recommend that enough. Getting your stuff organized into layers, especially with these bigger files, is going to be a super time saver. Everybody with me there? Okay. Other thing, I did some stuff rendering here. So this is, let me show you some options in the renderer. You may have noticed there's a cell shading option that has some interesting options. And so this is the standard renderer, right? It has the reflections and there's no ambient occlusion. It's just using the one light with ray trace shadows. And, but if you look, everything has this little outline to it, which is kind of neat, kind of like this architectural rendering kind of look. And that's the cell shader. The cell shader may present you with some new visual options for rendering, especially this project, which some of you may fit into your wheelhouse, right? Let's look at that. So here under render options, this guy here, cell renderer, is the thing I brought in. It's under effects. Yeah, it's not here because I put it over there, right? Cell renderer, okay? So this, what does this do? it does a couple things. There's these options up here, so I'm not going to do color. By default, it's just outlines. And so if I just did the outline, it would look like that. Right? So it's just a thin outline of all the stuff, right? It's low poly here. We'll turn this back up. There we go. Now, the one major drawback here is that the cell renderer is fast. That's good, right? But there's not a whole lot of options, okay? The first thing that everyone wants to do is like, that's great, can I make the line thicker? No, you can't. For whatever reason, that is not easily accessible. So if you start going down this rabbit hole, this will lead you very quickly. Cinema 4D has a much more robust system for this called Sketch and Tune. And it can do some very cool things, but it is a render hog, okay? It is hard to get it to work well for animation, where you're gonna need hundreds and thousands of frames. For like a still, it's nice, but it just, I don't understand exactly why it is that way, but anyways, instead of making the line thicker, one of the things you can do in Photoshop would be come in and make some quick changes. The other thing you may not know about is that in the picture viewer, there is some filtering built in so that, well, it's more like testing. So if I go over to filter, there's a whole bunch of stuff here for basic color correction that you can mess around with to just sort of play around before you send it over to After Effects, right? And so for instance, one would be the gamma. And so if I decrease the gamma here, you can see, I can really beef up that line to a point. At some point, you would be kind of destroying the anti-aliasing, right? And it would start to get pretty jaggy. But you could drop the gamma a little bit in order to certainly beef up that line. Everybody with me there? Okay. So that would be something. And then there's a bunch of other basic color correction stuff here. Curves per channel and saturation, brightness, that kind of stuff. Okay. I would not render with this on, because then you're just kind of baking it into the image, right? But as a quick way to sort of test it out and see like, okay, am I going to be able to make this work when I get it into After Effects? Yeah, right? How would I get this stuff in After Effects? Levels. The levels effect would give you most of these, and then saturation and brightness are their own effect, right, that in After Effects. Everybody with me so far? Okay, let's explore the cell renderer a little bit further. You can just have color. So I turned off outline and I just have color. Let's turn off illumination. So just color by itself gives you just like a totally flat color render. And it looks like that. Right, so it's like this, you can't really do a whole lot of sort of as far as quantizing the color readout. And objects that are more complicated, that have multiple things, kind of just get grayed out. But this by itself, maybe not all that useful, but if you were to combine this with the outline, you get an interesting, usable look. Right, so very, very much like, a lot of architectural, I follow a lot of like architectural previs accounts on Instagram, and there's a lot of stuff that comes across that's very much in this, 2D for 3D, super flat style. So I'm just showing you some options here that you may not have considered as far as like the look and feel of your project, right? So there's that. And then if I check one more box under cell renderer, if I click illumination, now it will essentially do the straight up render and then just add the outline to it, right? So if I click render now, it's doing, turn off this filter, it's doing the render, and then you see everything has this little black outline around it, which is super handy. And if I didn't want the outline to be black, Another interesting look is doing it in white. So edge color, you can change it to whatever you want. Let's see what it looks like in white. Different kind of inverted look. I don't know, that's interesting. Cool. Understand what's going on here? Then let's put that back. The only other checkbox is edges, and edges will outline every polygon, not just the object, but all of the geometry, right? So this is maybe not as useful because it'll get, especially where the geometry is dense, it's essentially like a grid overlay of all the geometry in the whole thing. Right, so if you didn't do a good job modeling it, it would be pretty obvious if you had that turned on, right? And the only other one that's interesting, let's turn off the outline. Quantize is decreasing it's like posterizing the color. So let's make it really extreme, like 3 steps. And so that first color render, it was totally flat, just like 1 color per object. And now it'll dumb it down to 3 steps per object. So it's like posterizing or quantizing. And so that leads to a pretty interesting look. Right? Now we're starting to look pretty cell shaded. Right, because we're actually getting the shadows now, but the majority of the highlights are being smushed into just 2 color ranges. So the glass kind of breaks down, but the other stuff, pretty interesting. Other things to point out here. So that's the cell render. One that's quick. 2, a lot of options there as far as doing something a little bit different with the look and feel of this project. I would not use a totally different rendering style for each world, right? I mean, I would sort of have the render style remain consistent and then the design of the world change from location to location. Everybody with me there? Because you've got your 3 different locations. Okay. A few other things to call attention to in this. All the cars move. Let's go low level of detail. And so you see like this is spinning, even with low level of detail, this is kind of choking a little bit. All the cars driving on the roads are the technique we talked about before, when you clone onto the spline, right? And use the rate in order to animate everything. The satellite dishes move randomly, and so if you want it, you can look in this espresso tag, and essentially I'm just using some noise to rotate them back and forth randomly, and the noise grabs its noise seed from the X position of the satellite dish, so each one ends up being different just by moving it, right? So every time you move it, it would get a different noise seed, and noise makes it rotate back and forth, and so each one's you watch, satellite dishes are moving. Trying to think if there's anything else. The buildings I made, same sort of technique, cloning onto some of that stuff. Some of those just blocks. I think if there's anything else weird here.
Maybe the spline rails.
What's that?
The spline rails you told me about.
Yeah, did I end up using that? I didn't end up using the rail. So yeah, I ran into some issues with, so this big loop road you know what? It'd be great if I could look at just the loop road. Oh yeah, I just did that. So here's outer road, turn off everything else. Cool. So just this road I had some problems with. Let's just look at that one, outer road. There we go, outer road. That's already paying dividends, having that all organized. So there's one spline that defines the actual shape. This one, I think, is that one I ended up not using. Okay, and so this spline defines that road shape, right? And this is the road. This is actually the tube, so this part here. How did I make the tube only part of the road? In the sweep NURB, there is this start growth and end growth parameter, right? And so that allows me to, move only sweep part of the road, right? And I just wanted that part there. And so that sort of gives me that tube over top. The cloner clones onto the same spline. You look, the cloner is on this spline there. Then the other thing was that by default the road didn't really match up with the cars. So I don't know if I can turn this off without. Instead of, you can guide it with a spline rail, but what I ended up doing to get the cars to look like they're on the road is that I expanded the sweep NURB for the road, and it was pretty much just bending this part of it. And so under rotation, this function is the spin of the sweep NURB over the entire length of the sweep NURB. And so by creating a function here and just sort of tuning it, I was able to curve the road in that part that comes off to get it to line up with where the cars are. Because here's what it would be by totally flat by default. That's what came out before I fixed it. And by creating this function and sort of tilting it just slightly, I was able to get it to line up with what's happening in the actual cloner, right? Yeah, because did I end up using the? I don't think I ended up using the rail. That ended up just being simpler than creating a whole nother spline. Something's misorganized here. Oh, it's this cloner. There we go. Yeah, there's no rail, right? So, and then I was able to make the cars, not be at the same distance by giving it just a tiny bit of offset and then tuning the offset variation. Just enough so that it was a little bit different, but not enough so that the cars would like run into each other. Because they're not smart enough to not run into each other, right? They don't have physics or collision or anything like that. And so, just enough to give it some variation. Because here with the rate variation, you see I also didn't give it much there, because if that had a lot of variation, they would speed up and sort of just drive through each other, which I didn't want. And so that does that part. Yeah. Save this file, save incremental, everybody incrementing and saving. And then we talked about this morning and last time at home. Did everyone turn on autosave at home? Brianna, you're smiling like you did not turn on autosave. Okay, so turn on autosave, right? So edit, preferences, files, check this box. At school, you would need to check it like every time you start the computer, okay? I'll try and get this fixed for next semester, but at home, check it and it'll stay checked, right? And it'll save, because this will automatically do your versioning for you. It'll save 10 different versions once every 5 minutes. Everybody with me there? So make sure you have that on. Cool. Yeah, you can explore the rest of it. It's nothing crazy, just stuff that we've looked at before. The cloner, I'm just sort of combining them in a lot of different ways. And let's go back and look through the studio. Turn the stage back on. There we go. So here it is at the end. Okay, so the other thing is that I started getting some weird results with this compositing with the sky. And so I'll just composite it against a white background in After Effects. In order to do that, this one's important. If I want to composite it and have it be see-through, you need to check alpha channel so that, one, you need to make sure there's no sky object, because the sky object will just cover up the alpha channel. Number two, you need to make sure that alpha channel is checked so that you can composite it against another background or solid or whatever you want to in After Effects later. You guys with me? The only other thing I did here that we haven't seen before is, if you look, let's just look at the dishes. I animated this communications thing, like just radio signal. Oh, I turned off studio. There we go. There you go. So this is not separate geometry. You kind of saw it in some of the examples when I changed the render. It's just one cone, one long cone that sticks out of each satellite dish. If I turn off, of course, it's not going to do what I want right now. There we go. That's all it is, right? One long piece of cone geometry. How did I make it look like rings? It's in the material. If you look at the material, in the alpha channel, Control Tab, it's going to help me a lot. In the alpha channel, I put a gradient with just a tiny little ring, right? And so it's mostly blank and then just one tiny ring. And they actually animate up. You see them shooting towards the sky because I animated the offset on the material. So if I just sort of dial this, see that? So it's just vertically offsetting that one stripe. And so it makes it look like these, and I tiled it like 50 times. And so it looks like, they're separate pieces of geometry, but it's just one piece of geometry, right? So it's not a particle system, it's just this one piece of geometry, and those just simply cycle through up the whole thing, right? So this one has 2 keyframes. Yeah, it just goes from one to the other over the course of the animation. Something to, create some interest, right? And again, this is the format I recommend visually, right? So establishing shot, we talked about. Let's go here. Turn this off. Okay. So my establishing shot, then I come in and look at detail, right? So if you build something, please show it to us, right? Don't hide it and then never render it. You're in control of the world, right? Literally playing God here. You can set the table. You can, set up the world in your favor here, right? So looking at some detail over here with these little car elevators, looking at some detail over here with the, sky road. Again, these little car things. There's a little loop road, right? So I'm just showing the different camera shots, and then the one with the thing on top, and then the road, and then yeah, and then back to here, sort of see the whole thing. So I think that formula is a good one to follow. Yeah, and this render clocked in at like 24 seconds a frame. And so, in one night I was able to render out the whole thing. Because it's, like I said, 30, what is this? 24 times 45? What did I do here? 60 seconds or 30 seconds or, so 24 times 30, yeah, 30 seconds long, right? 20 frames. Yeah, so if your project comes in at like a minute 30, that's a pretty good length for these things. I would try to keep each island in that 30-second range. Everybody with me? Okay, one last thing. I'll post the other tutorial for this. Is that one other, so the cell shader is like a stylistic thing, but still using the standard render engine. Everybody with me? Okay, here at school we have R18. That's not going to change anytime soon. But you guys who just downloaded it, even in the fall, you either have R19 or R20, right? And in R19, there's a big change in the viewport rendering. And in some cases, you could really get the viewport to work as like a really pretty passable final output, right? And you could do that. Nick, the Grayscale Gorilla guy, has a really good tutorial on this. I'll give you the gist of it right now. Okay, so what is this useful for? Well, look at this here. I mean, I just rendered it right now. What were we clocking in at? 27 seconds a frame for that. Where's the detailed one? Yeah, there we go. So that was sort of the look I've settled on. 23 seconds a frame. Cool. Let's see. That's using the standard renderer. Another option is to use the hardware renderer, which is going to use your GPU, essentially, OpenGL technology, versus stuff that's computed on your card, not ray tracing, okay? So it's not like Octane or Redshift. It's like OpenGL on your card, versus the standard renderer goes to your CPU in your computer, right? So all the calculations happen on the CPU. And there's one CPU, it has lots of threads, but anyways, let's look at this hardware option. In some cases, it may be substantially faster. The quality may not be totally comparable, but especially for a project like this where we're not going for photorealism, it may be totally usable, okay? And way faster. So how would I do it? You would switch to hardware, OpenGL, okay? Which essentially renders the viewport, but we can do some things to really increase the quality of the viewport. For instance, those are all right here under options, right? So if I turn everything off, there we go. So let's come back here. All right, so here's just vanilla C4D viewport, right? Looks just, I mean, that's not really a passable render. It's just kind of like really flat, and there's like some weird junk there, and there's no transparency. Like those are just just dots. I don't know what's happening there. So under options, if you turn on enhanced OpenGL, it sort of changes like the level of OpenGL. Cool. Now I'm getting some way more interesting stuff. Number one, if you turn on enhanced OpenGL, it doesn't have any of this other stuff on. And so what is this other stuff? What do I want to turn on? Well, I want to turn on reflections. And so now I'd be getting some, not real ray traced reflections, but sort of reflections of a sky, if I had a sky. And shadows. There we go. So that immediately looks way better. Actually I have shadows in the viewport. I can also turn on ambient occlusion. So this is screen space ambient occlusion. And so let's look a little bit closer where we could see it on screen. And so here it is without and with and tessellation. And yeah, these guys, which are still pretty dot-ish, I can also turn on transparency. There we go. I'm getting closer. And FX and noises. Better. And how would I render this? You render this using hardware OpenGL. So switching it up here from standard to hardware. And then making sure everything here is clicked. On your machines, in fact, someone go ahead and pull it up here. We'll look at it in a second. There'll be quite a few more boxes, and the output should also look even nicer. Right? 19, they updated a bunch of this code to change it, and so we could see what's going on there with that. But let's go ahead and just test it here. And I'm not going, let's just do this one frame. And so it'll take a second to prepare, but then it's done, right? So this one was essentially virtually no time. There's still all the grid and everything in there. How would I get that stuff out? That's over here under filter. So this is all like the optional stuff. If you turn that off, we can turn off the grid and splines. And the gizmo, which is the axis. Is that gonna get rid of it? There we go. Cool. So now we don't have any of like the viewport stuff in there. But it doesn't look spectacular here, especially because the anti-aliasing is not turned up to max. But we'll look at it on one of the computers with that newer version on it. And this may be a real option, especially for this project, to get it, I mean, really fast. Especially if you're coming down to crunch time. You guys aren't going to have that problem because you're going to manage your time really well and start rendering stuff real soon. And you don't have to worry about trying to jam something out at the last minute. But this would be a like orders of magnitude faster, right? Once it sends it over to the GPU card, it'll render in seconds versus, the standard renderer. The standard renderer obviously looks better. Like I'm not trying to say it's visually comparable, but it may be visually enough to work, especially if we look at the results here. And I'll post his tutorial for this. It goes into a much deeper dive. Yeah, so there. I mean, there's obviously more detail in that image, but this is not terrible. Cool. Let me